YouTube Originals. Words appear. Please watch this episode with headphones. Presenter Joss Fong wakes up in a darkened bedroom looking drowsy.
Do you hear that? It's 5 a.m. I have thin ceilings, and my neighbor is a morning person.
Joss comes down a stairway. Out on the street, builders put up scaffolding and noisy traffic roars by. Underground, subway trains screech along. Joss sits in a subway car looking tired and weary. Now she strolls down a street.
Look, I realize it's a little silly to live in the middle of a dense city and complain that it's loud, but I'm not alone in this.
People and traffic in Mexico City and Taipei.
You just hear trucks like when they're backing up.
The general volume of the sirens, like a laser, like a machine gun.
I deal with, in my day-to-day life, the sound of the highway that I literally live right next to.
The urban population of the world has quadrupled since 1960. Nearly 70% of human beings are expected to live in urban areas by 2050. If we're gonna keep piling into cities, they're going to keep getting louder. Headphones on.
It's so loud.
That's all the time.
Es todo el tiempo.
And I think it's time to ask, what does all that noise mean for our health?
Words arrange themselves on a light box. Is city noise making us sick? Why titles are sketched in Glad You Asked Season 2. By the Hudson River. Host, Lee Adams puts a camera around his neck and puts some white earbuds into his ears.
All right, so we are right next to the 59th Street Bridge. The only real instructions I got were to show up here and listen to a file Josh sent me, so here we go.
An animation shows the words The Science of Noise floating down the Hudson River.
Hi, Lee. It's Joss. I've sent you out into Midtown to learn about noise in the middle of one of the loudest cities on Earth. Go take a seat at one of those benches overlooking the river. And close your eyes, because I'm going to take you back in time.
Sunlight is reflected off the water.
This composition by audio producer Bill McQuay recreates what Manhattan Island might have sounded like before the city was built. Open your eyes and listen to the environment there on the East River. Tell us, what are you hearing?
Truthfully, the only thing I can really hear is the sound of the East Side Highway, like cars whizzing by, probably whatever's on the bridge, and then a ton of construction, this jackhammer. I won't stop jackhammering.
Okay, let's start walking. Go back down to 60th Street and head west.
See you guys down there.
Humans and other animals are vulnerable to excessive noise because our sense of hearing evolved to serve as an alarm system that never turns off, even when we're sleeping. We might not need that alarm system to be quite so sensitive anymore, but you can imagine how valuable it was for our ancestors to be able to sense the motion of creatures and objects that they couldn't even see.
This corner right here.
Look at your phone. I want to show you a video. Try to line it up with what you're seeing. When objects are vibrating like a car horn or someone's vocal cords, they create pulses of pressure that travel through air molecules. These are sound waves. They're everywhere. And when they carry a sound that we'd rather not be hearing, we call them noise. Our ears are sensitive to a huge range of sound waves. So this awful tone that you're hearing right now, it has a wavelength of about an inch. And this sound has a wavelength of more than 28 feet. Our brain interprets that wavelength as the pitch. The height of the wave, or the pressure level, determines the sound intensity, and that's reported in decibels. Using the sound level meter, take a reading where you are.
When I'm not talking, it's about a 75. That horn brought it up to an 80.
Decibels are not a linear scale. Instead, we experience an increase of 10 decibels as a doubling of loudness. 80 decibels is 4 times louder than 60.
Joss interviews Dr. Rick Neisel.
You've been studying the effects of noise on the human body for decades now. It seems like the most direct health consequence of noise is hearing loss. So a lot of the focus around hearing loss is on workers who are in particularly noisy occupations. Do you think that this kind of noise-induced hearing loss can also happen just from city noise, community noise?
We have known, at least since the 1970s, that certain environments, and typically we're talking about dense urban environments, cities, can have background sound levels that are high enough to cause hearing loss after years or even decades of exposure.
If someone wanted to know if they might have hearing damage from noise that they've been exposed to in their lives, what are some easy ways to test that?
So there are many different kinds of hearing tests that you can get through an app. The WHO, for example, has an app that's designed to evaluate basically how well can you hear, for example, speech in the presence of background noise.
To demonstrate how this test works, I'm going to play you some audio samples of someone saying 3 numbers with background noise. As you hear those numbers, circle them in the order that you hear them on these pages. Ready?
Okay. 9, 1, 6.
Fabiola and Cleo circle numbers on pieces of paper as they take the test.
7.
I feel like this is a race or something.
All right, I got an 81. You have good hearing. Fabiola, what did you get?
48. You may have a hearing problem. Oh my God, you guys.
You okay?
I can't help but laugh because I listen to music really, really loudly, and I like it like a lot.
So I'm wondering how much exposure has to happen before you start to suffer permanent damage to your hearing?
So in the workplace, most agencies believe that 85 decibels, which is about as loud as pushing a gas-powered lawnmower, for 8 hours a day for a 40-year working lifetime is going to cause hearing loss in something around 10% of workers. When we talk about acoustic trauma, which is one of these immediate damage circumstances, a single exposure for even a fraction of a second at 140 decibels could be sufficient to cause that instantaneous damage.
Lee's out on the street.
I have another video for you. Stand at the corner, sort of near the crosswalk that's facing south, across 57th Street.
I think we're here.
At the spot where you're standing, back in 2014, the NYPD used sound as a crowd-control tactic, following a grand jury's decision not to indict the police officer who killed Eric Garner. It's called a long-range acoustic device, or LRAD, and it creates a beam of sound that can be as loud as 136 decibels from 1 meter away.
2 cops carry the device.
Following a lawsuit brought by protesters and journalists who reported injuries, the NYPD has agreed not to use this noise again. Do you think this is a justified use of noise?
If I had to say it was anything, I would call it reckless. They're weaponizing noise to cause harm and injury to people's hearing in order to accomplish what really a loudspeaker could accomplish.
Devices like the LRAD are one of the more blatant examples that noise can be a form of power. And the power dynamics of noise play out at bigger scales too. I spoke to a researcher at Columbia who analyzed noise exposure across the United States. Here's what she found.
Communities of color and communities of lower socioeconomic status had higher nighttime noise levels. I think this is another piece in the puzzle that gets towards explaining why we see health disparities. And this is one that's, often not considered at all.
This is Chelsea, Massachusetts. It's a small city just north of Boston with a population of about 40,000 people. 45% of them are immigrants and 18% are below the poverty line. We're looking at Chelsea today because this is a town that deals with noise pollution from a whole orchestra of industrial and commercial sources, all within an area of just 2.2 square miles. There's the trucks, which transport goods from this massive wholesale produce market, these giant piles of road salt, and multiple oil depots. This entire waterfront area was set aside for industry in the 1970s, and ships drop off goods here that end up getting distributed to the entire region. There's a 6-lane highway. This was built in the 1950s to connect Boston to the North Shore, and it curves all the way through the city. There's the railroad, where under federal rules, all trains have to blow their horns at several points throughout Chelsea until the city upgrades its intersections. But the biggest one is here. This is Boston Logan Airport. It's an international airport open 24 hours a day. And the flight path from this runway goes directly over Chelsea.
A passenger plane soars over Chelsea. Joss speaks to a resident.
So you've lived in Chelsea for 12 years. Can you describe the moment you realized that it would be noisy here?
Especialmente en las madrugadas.
Myra Romero, a middle-aged Chelsea resident, says in Spanish, "Would wake me up. I have a 13-year-old, and sometimes he gets up in the middle of the night and says, 'Mom, I can't sleep because of the airplane noise.'"
I've looked at the data from the airport, and it seems like in the past 10 years or so, there's been an increase in the number of airplanes that fly over Chelsea. Have you noticed an increase?
She says, "Yes, I think it's not just me, but all of the residents of Chelsea have noticed. I think you feel it because all day you hear noise. For example, I work in a restaurant. You hear noise from the smoke fans in the kitchen, you hear the noise of the plates, and you get to your house, sit down, and you want to relax a bit and you're hearing the noise from the planes passing constantly." Myra looks through her window blinds.
The World Health Organization recommends that the sound level outside bedrooms not exceed 40 decibels in the evenings. According to Erica Walker, a researcher who did some monitoring in Chelsea, the noise levels here at night are more like 65 decibels. Do you think the residents of Chelsea have become resigned to the fact that noise is going to be part of the community here?
Myra says we're an undocumented community. We're a community of immigrants. We come from our countries resigned to the fact that they won't listen to us, and so sometimes we're afraid to raise our voices.
What would you like to be done about it? Is there anything that you would hope the government would change?
Myra answers, "I don't know if we could have a schedule for stopping flights at night. What we have to do is organize people so that our complaints are heard." Myra watches a low-flying plane pass over the streets of Chelsea. Joss sits with fair-haired Maria Bellin Power, Associate Director of an organization called Green Roots.
Green Roots is a resident-led environmental justice organization that works in Chelsea and East Boston, and we work to engage and empower the most vulnerable residents.
I looked at one study that analyzed airport noise specifically, and they found that Hispanic or Latino communities tend to be more exposed to noise than other communities in the United States. Why do you think that's the case?
Our communities end up living in communities where others don't want to live, where it's too dirty or noisy. And then when those communities become clean or healthier, they become too expensive and our folks are displaced.
I thought that I was a little bit removed from this story, but then I started to realize how many of the flights out of Logan are cargo flights from people's online shopping. And I've been doing a lot of that this year.
It is about individual choices, but I think more than that, it's also about how are we compensating the folks that are living with these burdens.
What are some of the other environmental exposures that the folks here are dealing with?
We have very poor air quality. Our community has one of the highest asthma and cardiovascular disease in the state. And with COVID, we were the most impacted city with the highest rates of infection, and at one time, 6 times higher than the state average. Noise may not seem that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things of folks living with so many barriers, but it does matter and it does impact people's lives and public health.
The industrial landscape of Chelsea. Words appear on a light box. Noise pollution. Joss is sitting at a desk in front of her laptop. She speaks to Dr. Rick Neitzel.
The World Health Organization has said that noise pollution was second only to air pollution in terms of the size of the environmental health threat in Europe. What do we know about the non-auditory health effects of noise?
So in the last couple decades, there's been a rapidly growing body of evidence that noise doesn't just hurt your hearing, but it's also tightly linked to myocardial infarctions or heart attacks and also to stroke. The WHO published a paper in 2018 that reviewed many studies, and their estimate was that for every 10 decibel increase in noise exposure in a community, the risk of cardiovascular disease might go up by 8%. The literature is still kind of converging on where does your risk of cardiovascular disease start in terms of a noise level, but I think everybody agrees it's much lower than 70 decibels, perhaps more towards 50 decibels over the space of, for example, a decade or more.
And what is the sort of logic connecting noise and sort of your heart health? How does that kind of harm happen?
So if you're trying to sleep at night in a noisy environment, you can end up having dozens or even hundreds of so-called microarousals during the night where you almost wake up. It's not a restful period. And sleep disruption turns out to be hugely predictive of cardiovascular disease. But noise in the environment can come at us at various times of day. So if I'm a worker and I'm working in a high noise situation, so I'm getting this fight or flight response, that's a very healthy response for short periods of time to get you out of danger. It's a very toxic response if you're having it for 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day.
I apologize in advance because this next one is not going to be fun. Do I have your consent?
You have our consent.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my God.
The blood pressures of Fabiola and Cleo are measured. Ugly static noises are pumped through their headphones. Cleo looks uncomfortable and closes her eyes.
Thank you for ending that. You experience that when you walk past a construction site and you know, like, oh, this is going to be over in like a couple of seconds, but this was very difficult to get through because I couldn't just remove myself from that.
It turns out we've been focusing on air pollution as a major cause of cardiovascular disease, which it is, but ignoring noise exposure, which is also a cause of cardiovascular disease, we may not have been saving Americans as effectively as we could if we focused on both of those things.
Joss nods. Later, she walks through Central Park wearing in-ear headphones.
I've noticed that a lot of the work being done about the health effects of noise pollution is coming out of Europe and relatively little from the United States. But that wasn't always the case. Back in 1972, Congress passed the Noise Control Act to, quote, promote an environment for all Americans that's free of noise that jeopardizes their health and their welfare. It set up an office at the Environmental Protection Agency to set noise standards and fund research, and it was making a lot of progress. But if you go to the EPA's website now, there's this big red notice that says the government phased out the office's funding in 1982. This was part of the Reagan administration's deregulation program. I'm on my way to meet Lee. He should be finishing up his tour. I picked out a nice spot that's sort of hidden in the middle of Central Park.
Joss!
Welcome.
I made it.
Joss watches as Lee measures the decibels in Central Park.
This is the quietest spot I've been in all
Wow.
day.
The monitor reads 49.
4 times quieter here than it was on 2nd Avenue. I think it's not just the volume that matters, but also the character of the sound.
Right.
There's a small number of studies that seem to suggest that the sounds of birds, of water, and wind can actually reduce the activation of our sympathetic nervous system. They help us relax when we're feeling stressed.
Ah. These are not sounds I hear very often where I live.
This is very calming. Like, I want to turn all the lights off and relax.
So I have basically 2 big takeaways from all the research I've been doing on noise.
Yeah.
The first is that we need to protect people from sound waves when they're sleeping. It's extremely important.
Joss sits with Myra, who says, it affects me emotionally. When we don't rest well, your nerves are a bit altered.
And in my mind, the worst case scenario is a worker who has a noisy job during the day and then goes home to a noisy community to try to sleep at night.
So are your windows upgraded to the point where they're keeping out
Totally
noise?
soundproof, yeah.
Can you afford air conditioning so that you can shut your windows? You can make sure that there are bedrooms that are sort of moved away from the actual traffic source. All of those factors go into how much noise people are exposed to. The second thing is that every city needs places with protected soundscapes where people can go to escape traffic noise, which is basically masking a lot of sounds that we might want to hear.
Right.
Things like people's voices, the birds, church bells. It masks all of that.
Fabiola and Cleo sit listening to the sound of the city on their headphones. Traffic mixed in with other noises, such as birdsong.
I could feel my muscles relax when it went away.
I guess I never considered how much noise we don't hear, right? I'm like staring at the water and I'm like, I can't hear it like smacking up against the wall, or you can see people having a conversation. It's completely mute.
Ultimately, people aren't expecting or wanting their cities to be silent. I think what we want to be able to hear is the identity and the life of our cities, and not just the noise of our machines.
I like the hydrants in the summer.
The noise of spoons within the cup.
Yeah. To me, that is like the sound of Mexico City.
I find it very comforting to just have the noise of like activity.
The idea of living in a place where I could hear other people living.
And when there are more noises, it just means that you are maybe surrounded by more people. And when there are more people around, it means there are countless possibilities.
In Central Park, Joss points up to a helicopter.
Perfect timing. A helicopter.
These are the like tours, the helicopter tours you can take.
Exactly.
Right.
The helicopter buzzes overhead. Vox Media Studios. YouTube Originals.